Hey everyone, and welcome to another one of our videos. Today is an exciting one for my 2011 Raptor, the black truck, and this is installation of some Baja Designs off-road lights on the front bumper of this truck. So I previously had mounted on the same front bumper a bunch of HID off-road lights. I want to say they were 7 or 8 inch lights. They're kind of your standard black housing with the red ring around it, lights from circa 2011 when the truck was built. They were failing over time, deteriorating over time, and the wiring was not really done super great. Part of it's fine, part of it's not. We're going to go through that and rewire that and show all of that. But we're going to go through and revamp the entire lighting setup on the front of the truck. So just to go over what we're putting on 4 LP9s. We're going to put on 2 spots in white and then 2 combos in amber, just to get the long range white light as well as longer range, as well as some flooded amber light for dust and whatnot, being in the desert Southwest here. So these are going on the front bumper of the truck. Like I said, it is an ADD stealth front bumper. It's an older version of the front bumper as well, so it actually has a light hoop that's big enough not just to fit a bar, but it's big enough to fit these larger roughly 8 inch lights. These are not perfectly round, so they're a little bit different, but it's big enough to fit these lights, which is awesome. So if you're going to do these on the front of your truck, make sure you either have a hoop that's big enough, which most of the bumpers for the Raptors don't as far as I'm aware, or just make sure you have a hoopless bumper. One of the two and you'll be fine. But like I said, we got these. You can see what they look like here in the boxes. These aren't going to go on for a little bit. We're going to have to do all the wiring and stuff first. But in addition to these, kind of to support the installation, I've got some of the Deutsch connectors, crimpers for the Deutsch connectors. I didn't know that the lights came with Deutsch connectors with them, but they do, so I probably won't need some of that stuff, but I've got those. And then to top everything off, I believe I'm going to end up throwing on these. These are the light covers, just to make sure that these lights don't get all chipped up on our wonderful highways and on any off-road trips or anything like that. So these are going on the truck. Let's go over to the truck and go over where we are right now and what everything looks like and how we're going to make these wire in and operate beautifully. So head on over there and see what we're doing. All right, so this is what the front of the truck looks like right now. Pardon the foam right here, that's just for my own padding in my garage, kind of tight fit. But you can see where the 4 lights were mounted and where the new Baja lights will mount. There's just a single hole mount for each one of these. And then the wiring is going down and through here and was originally kind of bundled up in some loom. Not the greatest job, falling apart anyway. And then the lights originally were using some spade connectors and those were falling apart and some of the crimps were falling off, etc., etc. So what's good about this is that the power wires and the 4 blue ones are still good. As far as I know, I haven't gone all the way back in here yet, and we're going to go in there because we're going to make all this wiring clean and nice. But as far as I know, those are going to be good to go and we're going to be able to reuse those. They're properly sized. I want to say that they're either 12 or 10 gauge. Might be wrong on the number off the top of my head. This is just from memory, but they're the proper size. I remember checking that a while back. What's not properly sized is the ground. This is one shared ground that's running back through there, the red wire. And it is significantly smaller than any one of those wires. I want to say that was an 18 gauge or something like that. And in addition to that, it is also shared among all of the lights. So everything was daisy chained together through that ground, which isn't the best way to do anything. That's not the way that I prefer to do things. And I think that there's probably going to be a better way to ground these lights anyway than running it all the way back to where that's going back there. So we'll see what we figure out with that. But this is what we have going on right now. So what I'm going to do is basically pull out the headlight, and we're going to start there. We're going to pull out the headlight, see where those wires go. I think I know where everything ends up going, so it shouldn't be too bad to trace out. And then we're going to figure out how clean all the terminations are in the engine bay, basically behind the battery over there. Make sure that there's no chafing on the wiring, and if everything's good there and I don't need to re-terminate anything, we're going to clean it all up and sleeve it all up. And then we're going to move on to terminating things down here. And basically, at that point, we're going to be able to plug the wires in. So it should be not the worst thing in the world to get done, but we're going to see how things go and how jank or how deep the jank rabbit hole goes. So gonna go ahead and pull out the headlight, show you that just on time lapse or whatever, and we'll rock and roll from there. We got the headlight out, fender cover on, and I kind of figured out where all the wires go. I did figure out where the wires go. So I can show you guys how this thing's running currently, because your trucks may be wired up similar or at a similar level of jank, and you know how we're gonna fix this. So we have all 5 wires, the shared ground, and then the 4 power wires running up into the fender well. You can see that they go up in there and run over the washer fluid tank. That's all fine and dandy. I'm not mad at those being, you know, not super tied down or anything up there. We could do a little bit better job of tying them down once we get up to here where the fender, the fender apron support is, but we're not doing too bad. Now, when we get up in here, you can see the factory upfitter switches right up here, and it's gonna be hard for me to point because I'm trying to hold a flashlight too, but right here are where the factory upfitter switches tie in. You can see the black and the red pair, that's for some lights in the rear. And then the 2 blue wires going into the one, I think that's a red wire right there, and then 2 blue go into what looks like green right there. Those are the 2 pairs. So the lights are set up where they come on in pairs. I want to keep it that way, and like I said, the power wire side of things doesn't look bad. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep that as it is upon a little bit further inspection, looking okay. But so far so good. For the ground, we actually have a decent spot for a ground up here. And it is this point right here, right behind the washer fluid tank. So you can see that black-red pair. This is the one right here. That is an example of how not to ground a wire. There's just a spade terminal kind of barely being held back behind this. Not good. And I know who did this. This was actually a well-renowned body shop here in the Phoenix area, which is kind of sad that they did that kind of work. The other ground isn't as bad. It's a ring terminal on a bolt, and it's using a factory ground point, just like this is. This is just more janky. So I think we're going to reuse this point. We're just going to do it differently. But we're going to run, basically we're going to run 4 ground wires up in here, and either 4 ring terminals or 2 big ring terminals or something along those lines. But that remains to be seen. But this right here is what we're going to pull out for now. We're going to pull that out, figure out how we want to run those grounds, and then what I'm going to do is basically use some split loom sleeve, not split loom sleeve, but some mesh, wire mesh, or not wire mesh even, nylon mesh braided sleeve, and I'm going to get these all pulled out with the new ground wires. I'm going to run 4 new ground wires, like I said. Get that all pulled out, run those wires up, get those tied down over there, and we're going to sleeve it from either here out or from up there. Sorry, from here in or from up there where all the wires are originating out. Should be nice and clean. So I'm gonna go ahead and basically strip all this sheathing off. I have the wires flag labeled, so I should be good to go as far as which ones are which, because I do still want to know that and can figure it out pretty easily, but don't want to have to refigure it out. So get those guys labeled, make sure that they're labeled, get that red wire stripped out, and figure out how we're going to do the new grounds. All right, so I have that old ground wire pulled out, and I'm kind of reconstructing or constructing new wires as we speak. Kind of figured out the routing that I'm going to go. It's basically going to be exactly the same as the blue wires. Going to follow up and over that washer fluid tank, and we're going to be good to go. I've got some 12 gauge, just normal ground wire that you'd use for any type of industrial or machine application or automotive, whatever. You can get this stuff at Home Depot, online, you name it, you can find it. I'm using green with yellow stripe because that's what's normally used for grounds in home and industrial applications, if you're not using just bare copper. So I have this for applications like this already on hand, using this stuff. My color code is already screwed up being blue for power anyway, so I'll use ground, the universal ground, as my ground. So I'm going to put all 4 with individual terminals on that same ground point. There is enough room for them there, luckily. I checked with just the ground terminals by themselves to make sure, but I've got some of these 1210 ground terminals, ground wire right there, stripped to the correct length. Get that guy on, and then crimpers, which are not to be found around me, but they're somewhere. Crimp the wire, crimp the terminal onto the wire, and I've got some heat shrink that I'm slipping over and heat shrinking in place just to clean it all up. This is what's going to be going to ground. So I'm going to build all 4 wires. They're going to be grounded individually, like I said. and we're going to move on to sleeving and everything. So we have the little ground harness built up. I actually went ahead and sleeved the power harness as well. I'm going to basically run them as two separate kind of chunks. Power one is going to be nice and sleeved by itself, and the grounds are all going to be nice and sleeved by themselves behind the light. And then once we get past it, in kind of the between the light and the radiator area, these will come together and they'll be sleeved as one unit and have each light's wiring pop out of that big loom. But this is what it looks like. You can see I just threw a bolt in here to hold all the ring terminals together, but this is how it'll bolt onto the fender well, nice and clean and easy. Got everything sleeved nicely, individually, and heat shrunk and everything, going into the big sleeve. And this big sleeve runs all the way through and out to the where it's going to terminate at the lights and everything. This sleeve right here is going to get cut back a foot, 2 feet, I don't know how much, but it's going to get cut back some amount. We'll just have to see how much that is whenever we get there. But this is ready to go ahead and get bolted into the truck for the final time and run along with the power wires. So I'm going to get those run and show you what the finished product looks like up to this point. Wiring on the truck has been checked. Everything looks good as far as the reaches go. It's a little bit tight of a stretch on the far end, but we should be good to go. It worked previously on the old lights, so like I said, we should be golden. So what I'm ready to do now basically is trim the wires to length and then put the connectors on and see if they work. I'm going to go one by one. I didn't put all the lights on. I just put one light on in each spot, or took one light and mounted it in each individual spot and checked to make sure the links were good. So those came out okay. Now we're ready to actually connectorize everything. So in order to do that, I'm going to trim the ground wires to length. They're a little bit long, all of them, to match the power wires. Want them to be nice and even. And at that point, I'm going to be ready to throw on the connectors. I wanted to go over that, though, because I'm not going to use everything that Baja Designs provided with these lights. So the lights come with everything that you need connector-wise, technically speaking, but the pins that they come with are not the type of pins that I like to use with Deutsch connectors. They are the little kind with wings. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. But they have the wings that you crimp over a wire. They're not bad, but they're what's called a stamp-style connector. I don't like using those. I like to use machine connectors. They're a little bit more secure, in my opinion. They make better contact, again, in my opinion. And they're a lot easier to terminate, in my opinion. So if you're new to these types of connectors, or if you just want the easiest and quickest way to do it, these are a little more expensive, but, in my opinion, much better pin. So all you need to do to terminate these is have a proper crimp tool right here. And basically all you do, it says insert terminal, then wire from this side. You find your green line on your terminal. It should be demarcated if it's a machine terminal, because they do look almost identical on either side with an offset collar in the middle. You drop it in where the green line is facing up towards you if you're looking down at the connector. And you take a piece of wire. This is just representation. You're going to need to have it stripped. You're going to insert it into said terminal, and you're dumping out the terminal just to show. You're going to use the crimper to crimp it, and it's going to make an impression on the terminal and crimp that to the wire. At that point, all you need to do is take the terminal, insert it into the proper hole in the back, and then if you have any extra holes, conveniently my kit has these in it. You take some little plugs and shove them in there. The Baja Designs light didn't actually come with any plugs, so whichever ones of the pins you're not using, you definitely do want to plug. So you're going to need to buy some of those separately if you don't have any already, because the lights don't come with those. And in the case of the sports, you're not going to be using all 4 pins, you're just going to use 2. So that brings me to the pinout of the lights. Right here, we have the LP9, 6, and 4 pinouts. And if we look right here, LP9 and LP6 Sport Edition, we have high beam, which is your positive 12 volts on pin 4, and ground on pin 2. This is labeled as looking at the back of the light, which effectively means we're looking at the back of the connector, which conveniently is where Deutsch connectors are numbered. So we have pin 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that matches with 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all we have to do is throw a pin in 2, ground, throw a pin in 4, power, and we're going to be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of that wiring off camera because I have the wire harness on the truck. I don't have a good way to film that, especially not close up and with any kind of detail. So I'm going to do that off the truck, get everything dialed in, and show you what the next step product looks like just with some connectors on lights. All right, so I've run into a little bit of a snag here, and I have a plan to overcome it now, but was trying to figure out what the heck was going on. Basically, whenever I built the harness, the 12 gauge ground harness, I was referencing some instructions I'd found online. Obviously, probably an older revision of instructions, and it kind of struck me as odd that they were calling out to use 12 gauge wire per light, but I figured that's what the manufacturer recommends, and if they're using a specific type of connector and everything, they're going to know what can be used and so on and so forth. That is not the case. I don't know if that was a typo in those old instructions or something, but the instructions that came with my lights, which obviously are the latest revision, at least of the time that I bought the lights, state use 14 gauge wire if wiring from a single power source. If you're wiring two lights, use 12 gauge from the power source to a split junction. Basically, when you branch off from there, use 14 gauge. Basically, you need to have 14 gauge going into your Deutsch connector, period. That's been my experience in the past, but I figured again, if they're recommending something specific, which is using 12 gauge into the connector, then they must know best, and so be it. Unfortunately, not the case. So instead of completely redoing the ground harness, what I'm going to do is pull two wires out of it, because what I'm going to do is basically use two of the 12 gauge grounds and branch off to two 14s each. So it's going to end up being actually a little bit cleaner in the engine bay, because I'm only going to have two grounds going to that ring terminal area. So it'll not be as kind of fanned out as it is right now. But I'm going to pull two of those out, kind of reconfigure things. I'm going to keep with the same color codes to keep everything homogeneous and everything. And then throw basically two 14s off of each one of those 12 gauge wires. And those 14s are going to run to the lights. So I'm going to go reconfigure all of that. Show you what the reconfiguration looks like, and then we're going to crimp connectors on and actually be able to power up some lights. So I'm going to go ahead and get my materials together and get rocking and rolling on that, and we will revisit whenever we have something to show. Well, we now have a recovery plan in place, and I have all the stuff that I need. I went out and bought some butt connectors here that are 12-10 size, this being 12, and two 14s, roughly equivalent to 12 or 10. So I've got these sized properly now. Got my crimpers to be able to crimp them on. What I'm going to do is, I've got one end stripped right here. Crimp this one end, crimp the butt connector onto this end. Get these two stripped to the same length as what you see right here. Twist them together, crimp them into the other end of the butt connector right there. And I'm going to heat shrink over all of that to make it nice and watertight as much as possible. And from there, I'm going to repeat the process here, and we should have some nice leads. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have the same green wire color as I did in 14 gauge as I do in 12. So I happen to have brown on hand, which will suffice. It'll work. So decent ground color, and I've got blue as my power. So like I mentioned earlier, my color codes are already screwed up anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and get this assembled. Try to time lapse it, see if it comes out well. If not, you won't see that, but we'll hop on back in once we've got some of this going. Alright, so I figured I'd share where I'm at so far. I've got two of my connectors wired up. Got just the left and the kind of left mid light wired up and ready to go. Tested, everything's good except for one thing on this one, which I'll get to in a second. But you can see I have the lights tied up right here, which is using a stock bolt for the bumper shroud, which is underneath here. I just kind of got a P-clip going through that, and it's holding the wiring harness up that I made for the lights. And then underneath here, you can see where I'm using another one of the stock bolts for the bumper cover shroud thing. And I'm just gonna have a P-clip go over that, and probably another one go over possibly one of these in the center, and then more than likely this as well, just to tie things out. The issue that I ran into, and I'm not sure what's causing it yet, but we'll see, is some noise coming out of the light actually whenever I have the light lit up with this using auxiliary 2. Auxiliary 1, plug the light in just to check function and everything, perfect, 100%. Auxiliary 2, I plug it in and I get a little bit of whining noise out of the light, and a couple times I've gotten some flickering. Don't really know why that is yet. the one thing that I did run into yesterday, whenever I was working on this, and it's a couple days later, since I started the video at least, is the battery in the truck was dying real quick. So I don't think the lights pull that much power. I probably got a battery that's going bad, but I do have it on a trickle charger right now going up into there. So hopefully that should be remedied, at least for the moment. But I'm not sure if it was because it was being undervolted essentially, or if it's another reason entirely and has an issue with the wiring. So I'm going to dig into that before I go any further, because if I have an issue with my auxiliary 2 circuit, I want to figure that out now and figure out what the cause is now, as opposed to repeating potential mistakes, which I don't think there's any, but repeating potential mistakes going forward through here. The one thing that's different about this versus this, and just the way that I wired them up, is the fact that I used a butt connector and some more wire to extend the factory, or not the factory, but the existing one that was here. Shouldn't really be an issue, but I did do that just for what it's worth. I wouldn't think that would introduce a noise issue especially, but we'll see. So at this point, we're ready to rock and roll as far as testing that light out again goes. I have the battery charged up, like I said. If it works, great, and it was just an undervoltage thing, great, I'm happy. If not, then we're gonna have to figure out what it is. But I'll test it out and we'll go from there. So good news, I just ran a little test and it looks like my winding noise is gone from the second connector down there now that the battery's charged. You can also see after running a quick test, actually it just popped up to 75%. It was down to 50% on my charger. So probably have a dead or dying battery. It got down to about 8 volts yesterday when I was doing this testing. So not great, but if I have to replace it, not a big deal. Gonna continue with the wiring though. So I have 2 more connectors. I think both of these I'm gonna have to extend, but it's super simple. It's just a butt connector, heat shrink, and bada bing, bada boom, I'm done. And then I'm just pulling the new blue wires as well as the brown wires underneath. I'm running it up underneath instead of up over the top of the valence like it used to be. So I'm doing underneath, like I said. So it's just gonna be pulling it from underneath and getting it to the proper spots up here. I'm basically using one light to mock up and getting it roughly centered in between the mount and the hoop up here. And that's getting me where I need to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish those up and then show you the finished product for the wiring, and we'll start installing some actual lights. All right, so we have all the wiring done. You can see I have everything coming through underneath the bumper. Like I said, I'm gonna have to figure out something to do to protect the paint on the valence. A lot of people might not care, but I would rather it not rub through the paint, or rather the sleeving not rub through the paint. Underneath, the wiring came out really clean. I'll get down under here to show you what's going on. Basically, we're just dipping underneath like you saw from above on all 4 of these. And then I have the wiring tied up right here, which is right after the second light's junction, at least second from the passenger side. And then I have the light tied up right here as well, if you can see, using a smaller P-clip over there. So everything's tied up nice and secure. You can see it's not really moving anywhere as I move or jiggle any of this. I mean, it's really nice and sturdy in here. Shouldn't have any vibration induced issues. So, and if we look up on top as well, everything's nice and clear and out of the way of anything. The only thing that may have some interference is the fuses with the little rubber flap panel that goes over here. I'll figure that out whenever we get there. I think that panel, if I remember correctly, kind of just runs to here, and then I believe runs to here, and you can see I can move the wiring kind of out of the way forward some, because I've got a little bit of wiggle room there. Hoping that's what it ends up being and that we're all nice and in the clear. So if not, I'll figure that out whenever we get there. But now we are ready for lights on the front. I checked out with the one test light that I was using. All 4 of these, they all work great. Like I said, now the battery's charged, no whine, everything works great, so it was an under voltage issue before. We're ready to rock and roll. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the lights out and start getting them mounted up and plugged in. So before we put the lights on the truck, I'm gonna do some pre-assembly here on the bench. You can see I've taken my test light apart. I had some Allen hardware that I was using without Loctite on it, just to temporarily set everything in place. But what we're going to do is go ahead and pre-assemble it with the hardware that came with it. So we're going to put the bracket on the truck, or sorry, on the light, and get this whole thing on the truck. Now, if you want to assemble this onto the truck, you can certainly do that. Tighten the bolt down, but because it's kind of fiddly to get this bracket onto the light, getting a washer on the outside as well as on the inside, I'm going to do that fiddly part on the bench and then put everything onto the truck from there, since you can just easily get a 9/16 inch wrench down here on this bolt. So what you're going to need is two 9/16 wrenches, one for this, one for this. If you're going to use the 1/4 screws that go in through the slots down here, so they go in kind of like that, you're going to need two 7/16 wrenches. If you don't, if you're not going to use those, and I'm not going to use those, you're just going to need one 7/16 wrench to wind in the normal 1/4 screws here. So the way these go in, screw, washer on there. What I'm doing is making sure that the A side of the washer, which is the nice rounded side, you can see the A side on the screw versus the B side here with the sharper edges. A side's going towards the paint, and then in this case, I'm going to put the A side, let's see, towards the light. So I'm going to have this go through. We're going to have this drop in here. It's going to be difficult for me to do on camera and actually show anything, but I'll give it my best shot. In fact, I'll just do this one out like this, since I don't need to drop it in place. And then we're going to thread that guy in. Now these have Loctite pre-applied on the screws. You can see that orange, or yellow stuff there. You're just going to need to make sure that you wind them in not all the way, so you're able to at least get this thing back apart, or wiggle around if you need to. But go ahead and get it snug down where you're still able to move stuff around, and then that's the point at which I'm going to put each one of these on the truck, position it, and tighten everything down to lock it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done on all 4 lights and move forward from there. You can see I've got all 4 lights mounted, and I would be showing you the finished product and everything right now if it weren't for the fact that the 2 Ember lights are DOA. Kind of disappointing considering how much the lights cost and the brand that they're from and everything, but so far customer service has been pretty good. These should be going back here in the next couple days to Baja Designs to get repaired and or replaced. Just waiting on a bunch of paperwork and whatnot from them, but we'll see where this picks up. Lights are installed, lights are going to have to come back off, at least those outer 2. The circuits I did test with the white lights and everything's good to go, so it's just unfortunately the matched pair of ambers being dead on arrival, so we'll see where this picks back up whenever I have some new amber lights or repaired amber lights. Alright, so I have all 4 lights now installed. You can see I have a battery charger up there because my battery is very angry, and I'm going to need to replace that. Found that out. But if we go ahead and turn on both the auxiliary 1 and 2 switches, you'll see all 4 lights light up. And they look beautiful. These things are bright as heck. You can see the wall right here where it's lit up. It's kind of hard to tell on camera, but it is so bright you can't even look at the wall really in person. So definitely happy with these. You're going to see them probably start flickering here in a second because the voltage is going to go down on the truck. So go ahead and turn them off. You can see how I have them paired up right there. Overall, I'm super happy with the install, the way that I wired them. Everything works well. Just not happy with my battery, but that's all right. It's a few years old in Arizona. That's about all you can ask for. If you have any questions on the install or anything else, please let me know in the comment section below. I'm happy to help you out however I can. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching. Hope to see you in the next video, and take care.